So in this segment, we're going to be talking about a further protocol deal. Is no guarantee of the DUP returning to Stormont, says the Irish Taoiseach. So there is no guarantee that a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol would lead to a re-establishment of the Stormont executive, the Taoiseach has said. So the BBC referring to Varadkar as the Irish Prime Minister or equivalent of that makes no sense, as Ireland has no monarch, but that's me being pedantic. His point stands. We'll discuss what the DUP have said later on in the video, but based on what Donaldson has said based on what Donaldson has said, it does not look promising on the Stormont front. Does not look promising. Talks continue between the UK and the EU to find a resolution on the protocol, where Varadkar said it's not a given it would restore power sharing. So talks between the UK and the EU have gone better. There are still a lot of issues, which I'll discuss soon in another video. But any resolution does not guarantee Stormont reopening unless the DUP are somehow forced to allow Stormont to reopen or the UUP somehow become the largest unionist party. Varadkar said its implementation was, quote, too strict and too rigid, and that created real difficulties, end quote. Making his first visit to Northern Ireland since becoming Taoiseach again in December, he added, quote, I'm totally of the view that we can work together to make changes that are necessary, that can get us back to a very low number of checks. I'd like to get to the point where we can agree on something that works for everyone and can work on a cross-community basis, end quote. So we have spoken about before about what Varadkar said. I think he's trying to just create a landing zone. The issue is that the DUP want the checks to end for goods that will stay in Northern Ireland. The problem is, how do you know which goods are going to stay in Northern Ireland and which ones won't? That's the issue the DUP and the UK really can't answer. Speaking after his meeting with the Taoiseach, the DUP leader Donaldson said Mr Varadkar had, quote, a better understanding of the difficulties that the protocol is creating for Northern Ireland. We covered a wide range of issues, not least the protocol and not least the need to ensure we get a solution that both unionists and nationalists can support. He goes on to say a deal that works for everyone has to be the way forward, and that has to address the very genuine, real concerns that unionists have about the harm the protocol is doing to Northern Ireland, end quote. So Northern Ireland is actually benefiting from the protocol. There are issues, but most businesses have tried to reroute their supply chains, which are resolving a lot of the issues. The access to live data should further help, given that it's supermarkets that are facing the vast majority of checks, about the 80% mark. Varadkar said while a protocol deal could unlock the possibility of re-establishment of the executive, it's not a guarantee. It will still be of value on its own, but obviously our desire is that we should have the first thing happen, which is an agreement on the protocol, then unlocking the restoration of the Assembly and the executive, but it's not a given that one follows the other, he said. The Tories can do stuff to annoy the DUP, like set up more border checkpoints in the Irish Sea for goods, going from GB to NI, but for the most part, once a further agreement has been reached, I don't think there's really a way for the DUP to be forced back into Stormont. But, again, Varadkar is right. It's important to get the protocol stuff done first, and then you can try and deal with the DUP after. So the DUP leader announced 7 tests for Her Majesty's government plans on the protocol. So this came out last year, and Donaldson has said more recently that he's going to stick to these 7 points. So let's have a look at each one. With Donaldson saying, quote, but ultimately, if we get an agreement or legislation at Westminster that meets our 7 tests, we will not be afraid to stand up and say this is the right thing, and we will call on unionists to support it, end quote. So let's have a look. So fulfill Article 6 of the Act of Union. I'm not sure what that means, but generally it's meant to be about, Northern Ireland's place within the Union, which, there was a court case about it. The DUP lost. The Northern Ireland Protocol does not impede upon the Northern Ireland's place in the Union. Avoid any derision or division of trade. The issue is that once you put a trade border in place, there will always be some diversion of trade. Even if the checks are minimal, it's just guaranteed going to happen just because of the cost. So that one's not going to happen. Not constitute a border in the Irish Sea. There's not really a border there, but there is a trade border. So 2 and 3 can't happen. Give the people of Northern Ireland a say in the making of laws which govern them. Again, the EU have talked about a consultancy kind of thing where Northern Ireland will be consulted on the changes that are going to happen, but the problem is it's the Council of Ministers and the MEPs that make up the laws which govern the EU single market for goods, and Northern Ireland is in the EU single market for goods, so that's not going to happen. Result in no checks on goods going from NI to GB or from GB to NI. The problem again is, how do you know which goods are staying in Northern Ireland from Great Britain and which ones aren't? That's another problem. Ensure no new regulatory borders develop between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. See, that wouldn't be hard if the UK had dynamic alignment with EU rules. So 6 is possible. Preserve the letter and spirit of Northern Ireland's constitutional guarantee in the Belfast Agreement by requiring consent from a majority of its citizens for any diminution of its status as part of the UK. So essentially, asking stuff to be put into a referendum if it does diminish the Northern Ireland's part in the UK, which that possibly can happen. But again, you would have to define which things do quote immunise, I don't know if that's a word, parts of Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. You'd have to figure out what that question actually means before you can put it to a referendum, or put anything to a referendum. So if we look here, 2, 3, 4, 5 are not possible. 1's already been done. 6 is possible. 7 is also possible, but the 7 test won't be met. So it'll be interesting to see what happens once this and a recent thing over the Northern Ireland Protocol is sorted. What happens from there? That's what I'm going to be quite interested in, and probably going to cover quite a lot of. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.